In court, my ex's lawyer said, "She's broke. She can't even afford a home or decent food and clothes for the kids. Why should she get them?" The judge nodded. I stayed quiet holding back tears. Then my 7-year-old stood up and said, "Mom, can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" The room fell silent. The judge read it then looked up, shocked. Even my ex went pale. I'm 39 years old, and until last week, I was the senior project strategist at Carson & Blake, a fast-growing consulting firm in Chicago. I was also the one who designed the project plan that landed them the $20 million Faulkner Industries contract, the biggest in company history. But that's not what my personnel file will say. This is how the real world works. My boss laughed as he slid the termination papers across his desk. "Don't take it personally." He called it restructuring. I called it betrayal. The moment felt surreal. His office smelled of stale coffee and expensive cologne, and the air conditioner hummed too loudly for a February morning. I stared at the documents in front of me, my ears buzzing. After 5 years of building the firm's most complex strategies, after working late nights and missing recitals and holidays with my daughter Ellie, I was being dismissed like a disposable assistant, effective immediately. "I'm sorry, Claire," he said with a shrug, not looking sorry at all. "But we need fresh voices, new energy. You know how this goes." No, I didn't. Not like this. Not after what I'd given them. "Just breathe," I told myself, holding my chin high. I didn't want him to see the tremble in my hands. I wouldn't give him that. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said quietly, standing to leave. He looked surprised by my calmness. I suspect he expected tears, outrage, maybe even begging. But when you've rebuilt your life from nothing once, you learn how to walk away with your dignity even when it feels like your lungs are collapsing. I didn't ask why he hadn't mentioned my project in the meeting. I didn't need to. 2 weeks earlier, I had finished the Faulkner proposal, the most complicated high-stakes pitch we'd ever attempted. I'd spent 3 months on it, building the strategy, crunching the data, aligning it to their growth forecasts. It had taken every ounce of my skill. The day before the presentation, I'd found the final version on his desk. My name was nowhere on it. "Don't worry, Claire," he'd said then, waving it off like an afterthought. "This is just how these things work. You'll get credit internally." I didn't push back. I should have. Now I was being walked out of the office by a woman from HR I barely knew. My cardboard box in hand, my email disabled, my keycard deactivated before I even reached the elevator. In the parking garage, I sat in my car for nearly an hour gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my throat. I wasn't just angry. I was gutted. Not because I'd been fired, though that stung, but because I'd let him use me, because I'd seen it coming and still gave him everything I had. As I drove home through the sleet, I thought about Ellie, about the rent, the tuition, the braces I still needed to pay for. I thought about the months of working until 1 a.m., of waking up with my laptop still open beside me, of the nights Ellie had eaten dinner alone while I finished just one more thing. I thought about the time he told me, "You don't have a killer instinct, Claire. That's what's holding you back." He was wrong. That night, as the city froze outside my window, I opened my personal laptop and logged into my cloud archive. I'd saved every version of the Faulkner proposal, every edit, every note, including the original concept sketch with my name and timestamp. I hadn't meant to be strategic. I just believe in backing up my work. What I didn't know then, what he didn't know, is that the head of Faulkner Industries, Sophia Lin, was a former client of mine. We'd worked together 6 years ago when she was still running her startup. She'd once told me, "If you ever need a real opportunity, call me. The people who build things deserve more than the people who sell them." I never called, but maybe it was time. As I stared at my inbox, her name sat at the top of my contacts like a forgotten promise. I clicked compose. Subject, "The real author of your proposal, Sophia. I hope this finds you well. You may not remember me, but we worked together during your early funding round. I'm writing because I recently left Carson & Blake, and there's something you need to know about the Faulkner proposal." My fingers hovered over send. What I didn't realize then was that this single email would set off a chain of events that would unravel the very company that thought they could erase me, and that by the end of the week, I'd be sitting in the executive chair across from my former boss, not as an employee, but as his client. By the time I hit send, my hands were trembling. It wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. The kind that comes from finally standing up after being knocked down too many times. I didn't know if Sophia would even read the email, let alone respond, but at least I had spoken. At least I hadn't just disappeared quietly like they expected me to. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the silence of my apartment broken only by the sound of Ellie breathing softly in the next room. She'd fallen asleep on the couch waiting for me to come out of my room. I hadn't told her what happened yet. I didn't want to scare her, not until I knew what came next. At 7:02 the next morning, my phone buzzed. "Sophia Lin. Claire. Of course, I remember you. I still use the growth model you built for our Series B funding round. Thank you for reaching out. Let's talk. I have some questions and an opportunity I think you'll want to hear about." Sophia. I sat up so fast I nearly spilled my coffee. Sophia Lin wasn't just the CEO of Faulkner Industries now. She was a rising star in the tech world, known for being sharp, ethical, and unafraid to shake things up. If she wanted to talk, this wasn't just a curtsy reply. I called her that afternoon. Her assistant put me through immediately. "Claire?" Sophia said, her voice calm but clipped. "I've reviewed the documents you sent." There was a pause long enough for me to brace for impact, and I'm livid. I thought you should know the proposal wasn't authored by the person who presented it to you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That was my work. Of course it was, she said. I knew the moment I saw the wording. It had your fingerprints all over it. She asked questions, sharp, detailed ones, about the research, the data modeling, even the way I'd structured the risk mitigation plan. I answered them easily, not because I'd rehearsed, but because it was mine. Every single piece of it. Claire, she said finally, I'm terminating the contract with Carson and Blake. Effective immediately. My heart skipped. You're sure? Absolutely. I don't do business with liars, she said, then added, and I don't reward theft, but I don't believe in letting great work go to waste either. We still need this strategy implemented. I was already planning to launch a new venture. I want you to come in as a partner and CEO. It's yours if you want it. I blinked, unable to form words. You always had a mind for building, Claire. You just never had the space to lead. I can give you that, but I need an answer quickly. I want to hit the ground running. I was quiet for a long moment. I need to think about it, I said finally, though my heart already knew. I understand, she said, but don't take too long. You deserve more than a footnote in someone else's story. We ended the call, and I sat in silence, the phone still in my hand. Me, CEO. I thought about everything that had led here. The late nights, the overlooked contributions, the patronizing feedback. I thought about the phrase that had haunted me since yesterday. This is how the real world works. He was right in a way. The real world did work like that until someone decided it wouldn't anymore. That night, I told Ellie everything. She was sitting cross-legged on my bed, wrapped in her favorite oversized hoodie. They fired you? She asked, her eyes wide. But you work harder than anyone. I know, I said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. But it's okay. Something better might be coming. She looked at me seriously, like only a 13-year-old who's had to grow up too fast can. Are you scared? Yes, I said honestly, but I'm also ready. The next morning, I called Sophia. I'm in. Good, she said. Your new title is CEO of Lynn Harper Consulting. I've already put the paperwork in motion. 2 hours later, the news broke. Faulkner Industries cancels contract with Carson and Blake, citing leadership concerns. Inside sources said the company was caught off guard. I smiled as I imagined the look on my former boss's face when he saw the headline, but that was only the beginning. The next day, his assistant tried to set up a call with Faulkner to salvage the partnership. Sophia forwarded the email to me with a short note. He wants to talk to the CEO. Your move. And so the next morning, when the call was finally patched through and his voice came on the line, panicked, desperate, I took a breath, straightened my posture, and said the words I'd been waiting for. This is Claire Harper. You're speaking with the new CEO. The silence on the other end was electric. For a moment, all I could hear on the other end of the line was shallow breathing. Claire, he finally said, I wasn't expecting you. I figured, I replied, keeping my voice even. You were trying to reach the CEO of Lynn Harper Consulting? That's me now. He gave a weak chuckle, the kind someone uses when they're scrambling to regain control of a situation they've already lost. Look, Claire. This is clearly some kind of misunderstanding. I didn't know there was an issue between you and Carson and Blake. Had I known you were still involved, I would have handled things differently. I let that hang in the air for a second. The audacity of it. You didn't know. I said slowly. You removed my name from the final version of the Faulkner proposal. You presented my work as your own. Then you fired me 2 days later. But you didn't know there was an issue? His voice shifted, more defensive now. I was under pressure. The board wanted cuts. I had to make hard decisions. You know how this business works. And, honestly, Claire, you're a talented analyst, but you were never leadership material. That stung more than I expected. Not because I believed him, but because it was the same line I'd heard for years. Too quiet, too methodical, too precise, too much, but somehow never enough. You made a mistake, he continued, and I don't just mean walking away. You're burning bridges you might need later. Think about your future. Think about your daughter. That was the moment I felt the shift. He just tried to weaponize my child against me. You don't get to bring my daughter into this, I said, my tone colder now. And I'm not burning bridges. I'm building my own. There was a long pause followed by a deep sigh. You know, he said, you used to be different. You used to be grateful. That word, grateful, as if everything I'd earned was a favor. I was never grateful for the way I was treated, I said. I was committed, loyal, but that loyalty ended when you decided I was dispensable. I'm not the one who should be worried about the future. You are. I ended the call. That same day, Sophia and I met in her downtown office. It was sleek, modern, and filled with light, but it wasn't the design that struck me. It was the energy. Everyone moved with purpose. It felt alive. You handled that perfectly, she said after I told her about the call. But brace yourself. People like that don't go quietly. She was right. By Thursday, the story started circulating. First on LinkedIn, then in internal channels I still had contacts in. He was spinning a new narrative that I'd left the firm voluntarily after underperforming, that I'd been bitter, unstable, difficult to manage. It was so familiar, so predictable. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through my records, emails, project logs, performance reviews. For 5 years, I documented everything, not because I expected to need it, but because I was the kind of person who always kept the receipts. That night, I received a message from Julia, a former colleague. Claire, I don't know if you've seen what's being said, But I want you to know I've got your back. We all know the truth. And if you ever need a witness, I'm in. She wasn't the only one. Over the next 2 days, I got more than a dozen calls and messages from former coworkers, all sharing similar experiences. Credit taken, promotions denied, voices ignored. Many of them had been too afraid to speak up. Some were still there quietly surviving. You were the first to walk away, Julia said. But now that you have, some of us are ready to follow. By the end of the week, I had more than support. I had documentation, screenshots, messages, internal memos, pieces of a puzzle that painted a picture of years of manipulation, mismanagement, and unethical behavior. The best part? I didn't need to use any of it because the board of Carson & Blake was already getting nervous. On Monday morning, a notice appeared on their investor page. The Faulkner contract had been officially terminated. Revenue projections were revised downward. Stock value dropped 6% by midday, and then I got the email I hadn't expected. Claire, this is confidential, but the board is investigating leadership conduct. Several partners have raised concerns about the handling of key accounts, including Faulkner. There's talk of a leadership transition. You didn't just walk away. You exposed something we'd all been ignoring. Anonymous. I read it 3 times before closing my laptop. My hands were steady now. He said I'd made a mistake, but it was starting to look like the only mistake I'd made was staying as long as I did. By the following week, the whispers had turned into headlines. Top consulting firm loses flagship client amidst leadership controversy. Carson & Blake in crisis mode after executive shakeup. I watched from my home office as the updates poured in, my laptop open, my phone lighting up every few minutes with new messages. Each one felt like a quiet vindication, not because I wanted revenge, but because the truth was finally forcing its way to the surface. The same truth they tried to bury me with. At Lynn Harper, things were moving fast. Sophia and I were building a team. Smart, sharp people. Some of whom had left Carson & Blake not long after I did. Others came from Sophia's network. But every single one of them shared the same motivation, to build something honest, ethical, and excellent. For the first time in years, I wasn't just executing someone else's strategy. I was creating the blueprint. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. My former boss, let's call him Matt for clarity, wasn't someone who accepted defeat. Not quietly. Not ever. That Friday, my lawyer, Dana, called me. "You're not gonna like this," she said flatly. "Go ahead," I replied, bracing myself. "Carson & Blake filed a cease and desist order against you, claiming you used proprietary information from your time there to launch your own business and poach their client." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. "You mean the client whose contract I wrote, whose strategy I designed, and who was already a professional contact of mine before I even joined Carson & Blake?" Dana snorted. "Exactly. It's a scare tactic. They're hoping you'll panic and settle quietly. Or better yet, fold." "Let them try," I said. "We documented everything." "We did, but I want to be proactive. We're filing a countersuit, defamation, wrongful termination, and professional misrepresentation. We'll also be submitting supporting statements from your former colleagues. Some are already signed." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the city skyline beyond my window. It felt surreal. A month ago, I was just trying to hold on to a job. Now I was defending my name in legal filings and winning back control of my narrative. But what surprised me most wasn't how fast things escalated. It was how many people showed up for me. People like Nathan, one of the senior analysts I'd mentored. He reached out late that night. "Claire, I've stayed quiet too long. I knew what Matt was doing. We all did. You were the reason our strategies worked. He just took the glory. I've attached a timeline of project credits showing where your name was removed or replaced in internal documents. Use it if you need to." Nathan. Then came Alicia, a former HR rep who'd left 6 months before me. "Matt pushed to change your performance evaluations the quarter before you were fired. I have the original files. You were rated exceeds expectations before it was altered to meets expectations. They were laying the groundwork to remove you." Alicia, I sat with that for a long time. Even knowing what I knew, it still hurt. Not because I believed their lies, but because they were so deliberate in crafting them. They hadn't just used me. They'd erased me. But now, piece by piece, I was reclaiming the space they tried to deny me. Dana moved fast. Within days, she filed the response, attaching documented proof of my original work, email threads with Sophia, and statements from 5 former employees, all of them willing to testify under oath. The cease and desist was dropped within 48 hours. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. It was the clearest admission of guilt I could have asked for. The next week, Sophia and I presented our official launch deck to potential investors. Our pitch? A consulting firm rooted in integrity, built by women, focused on sustainable strategy over short-term wins. The room was electric. We secured our first 2 contracts that afternoon. As I stepped into the elevator, I felt a wave of emotions, pride, disbelief, and an undercurrent of grief for the years I'd spent waiting for permission to lead. I had always thought the house would win, that the systems in place were too rigid, too protected. But sometimes, the house forgets. It's the people doing the work who hold it up. And when those people walk away, the whole structure shakes. That night, I picked Ellie up from school. She ran to the car smiling in that bright all-teeth kind of way. "How was your day?" I asked. She buckled her seatbelt then turned to me. "My teacher asked us who inspires us the most." I said you. I looked over trying to keep my throat from tightening. Why me? I asked softly. Because you didn't let them stop you, and because now you're the boss. I smiled, eyes stinging with tears. Not just because she saw me, but because for the first time, I saw myself clearly too. By the end of the month, our new company was already making noise. Lynn Harper Consulting had officially onboarded 2 major clients. One of them, a direct competitor of Carson & Blake. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same firm that once told me I lacked executive Polish was now watching from the sidelines while I led strategy calls with Fortune 500 decision-makers. But this wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. It was about taking back space and redefining what leadership looked like. Still, something shifted when the first media outlet called. The article was titled, "From Discarded to Disruptor, the woman who turned her firing into a CEO role." The reporter had done her homework. She knew about the Faulkner contract, about my termination, and even referenced internal memos that had mysteriously been leaked. "I'm not looking for a fight," I told her during our phone interview, "but I am tired of pretending that what happened was normal." It wasn't, and I'm not the only one. When the piece went live, the response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from other women, former employees, even people I didn't know. This gave me the courage to speak up at work. "Your story is mine. Different names, same playbook. I've been silent too long. Thank you." I should have felt proud, empowered, but something inside me tightened instead. Because with every person who reached out, I realized just how widespread the damage was. It wasn't just me. It never had been. And now everyone was watching, including Carson & Blake. 2 days after the article dropped, Dana called me. "They've hired a crisis management firm," she said. "They're trying to get ahead of this. I wouldn't be surprised if they make a public statement soon." "Let them," I replied. But it wasn't just a statement. It was a full-on campaign. They published a blog post on their website titled, "Moving Forward, Learning from the Past and Building Stronger." It was filled with vague language about miscommunications, team transitions, and internal improvements. They didn't name me, but it was clear they were trying to control the damage. Then Matt resurfaced. A podcast interview. "Of course, I think we live in an age where people are quick to assign blame," he said smoothly. "Look, I've made mistakes. We all have. But the truth is, not everyone is cut out for the pressure of leadership. Sometimes people misinterpret decisions that are just part of running a business." It was so perfectly rehearsed, I almost laughed, but what came next surprised even me. That night, I received a message request from someone I hadn't spoken to in over 10 years, Nina Rhodes, former senior partner, co-founder of Carson & Blake. She had retired quietly before I was ever promoted to senior strategist, but her name still carried weight in the industry. Her message was short. "Claire, I've been following what's happening. I believe you. If you're open to it, I'd like to meet." We met for coffee in a quiet corner cafe in Lincoln Park. She looked older than I remembered, but carried herself with the same quiet authority. I stepped down before Matt took over full control. She said, "I saw some of the decisions being made and knew I didn't want to be part of that direction, but I never expected things to fall apart this quickly." "You knew?" I asked. She nodded. "I suspected, but I didn't have proof, and I wasn't brave enough to dig deeper." I studied her face. There was no performance in her eyes, just regret. "You weren't the only one he tried to erase," she continued. "You were just the first one to hold him accountable." She reached into her bag and handed me a flash drive. "These are internal evaluations, meeting transcripts, and board communications from my last 6 months at the firm. I think they'll support your case if you choose to take this further." I took it, heart thudding. "Why now?" "Because it's time the truth had more advocates than excuses," she said simply, "and because you reminded me what real leadership looks like." We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women from 2 different chapters of the same story. One walking away from a legacy, the other reclaiming her own. That night, I opened the drive. She wasn't exaggerating. There were memos highlighting intentional manipulation of performance reviews, transcripts of strategy meetings where Matt discussed using layoffs as a distraction tool during PR crises, even a draft presentation to the board titled, "Restructure Plan, Quietly Replace High-Risk Staff Before IPO Consideration." I wasn't a risk because of performance. I was a risk because I knew too much and because I asked too many questions. The next morning, I forwarded the materials to Dana. Her response came just 3 minutes later. "We need to take this public. This isn't just about your story anymore. This is systemic. Are you ready?" I stared at her message for a long time. "Ready? Number prepared?" "Absolutely." The decision to go public wasn't made lightly. I spent that entire weekend reviewing everything with Dana, line by line, file by file, making sure every document, every timeline, every name was accurate. We weren't just exposing misconduct. We were setting a precedent. By Monday morning, the story had been submitted to the Wall Street Ledger, accompanied by a full evidentiary file. We also prepared a formal complaint to be sent to the state's Department of Labor and the SEC, citing patterns of employee misrepresentation and fraudulent investor disclosures during performance review periods. I thought I'd feel terrified when it all went live, but I wasn't. I felt calm, focused, free. The article went viral within hours. Consulting giant accused of systemic retaliation against whistleblowers. Internal documents leaked. From CEO to scapegoat, the collapse of Carson & Blake's culture. Former strategist Claire Harper sparks industry reckoning. Suddenly, I had become the story. Not the woman who was fired, but the woman who refused to be erased. My phone didn't stop buzzing for 3 days. Journalists, former employees, women in consulting firms from New York to San Francisco. Some called it courageous. Others called it career suicide. But for me, it was neither. It was necessary. On Wednesday morning, Sophia walked into my office holding 2 coffees and a huge smile. "You broke the internet," she said, setting 1 cup down in front of me. "I didn't mean to," I replied. "Exactly why it worked." She sat across from me studying my face. "How are you really?" I paused, exhausted, but strong. "I knew you'd be the one to change things," she said softly, "but I didn't expect the ripple effect." She wasn't exaggerating. Within a week, 2 high-profile executives resigned from Carson & Blake. Anonymous sources confirmed the board had been aware of internal misconduct for years and had actively downplayed concerns. A former HR director came forward on record, confirming systematic efforts to downgrade performance reviews and silence employees who raised concerns. The firm's legal counsel issued a statement promising a top-to-bottom restructuring. Matt? He was placed on immediate administrative leave pending an internal investigation. His LinkedIn bio vanished overnight. No posts. No spin. Just silence. I didn't gloat, not even for a second. Because this was never about revenge. It was about recognition. Recognition for the hundreds of employees like me, quiet builders, invisible architects, the ones who make things work behind the scenes and are then dismissed without a second thought. It was about rewriting the ending for ourselves, for each other. Ellie and I sat on the porch that Friday evening. The air was warm for spring, and the sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple. "Mom," she said, looking up from her phone. "You're on TV again." I chuckled. "I know. Getting tired of seeing my face?" "No," she said, leaning against my shoulder. "I think it's cool. You didn't let them treat you like you didn't matter." I kissed the top of her head, feeling the weight of what that meant. Not just for me, but for what she now believed was possible in her own life. Later that night, I sat at my desk looking over an invitation from a university in Boston. They wanted me to speak at their annual Women in Leadership Summit. The title they'd assigned, "How to Be the Architect of Your Own Power." I accepted, not because I wanted the spotlight, but because someone needed to say it out loud. The way things have always been isn't the way they have to stay. The following month, Carson & Blake formally settled the case. A confidential financial resolution, public apology, and the resignation of 3 additional partners. More than money, the settlement required them to implement new employee protections, an independent ethics board, and quarterly transparency reports. It wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. As part of the agreement, I declined a non-disclosure clause. If they thought they could buy my silence, they hadn't been paying attention. I stayed on as CEO of Lynn Harper, guiding the firm into its second year with a new client portfolio, a reputation for integrity, and a waiting list of applicants wanting to join. But more importantly, I stayed visible, because stories like mine only matter when they're told, when they remind others that their experiences aren't isolated, that silence isn't the price we pay for survival, that we get to decide when our story ends.